"That's enough, sir. You'll have to leave. Now." The words hit harder than any round Calvin Mercer had ever dodged. He didn't argue, just nodded, tucked the photo back into his jacket, over his heart, and turned away. No anger, no protest, only silence and the weight of memory. As he walked away, the photo burned in his mind. 7 faces, smiling, forever young. He wasn't asking for applause. He just wanted them to be remembered. But earlier, the guard had looked him up and down and said, "Sorry, sir, we don't take things from just anyone." Just anyone? That's what they thought he was. They had no idea who Calvin Mercer really was. And neither will you, until you hear what happened next. Calvin Mercer lived in the quiet fringe of Springfield, Ohio. Not quite country, not quite city, just far enough from the noise of the interstate that you could hear the birds in the morning and the freight trains at night. His house was small, 1-story brick with a sagging porch and a cracked sidewalk. He patched himself every spring. A U.S. Marine Corps flag hung below the porch light, sun-bleached and fraying at the edges. To most passers-by, it looked like the home of a man who'd simply grown old and still believed in order. But Calvin Mercer hadn't just grown old. He'd endured. At 85, Calvin was more than just a veteran. He was a relic of a war most people only knew through grainy footage and misunderstood headlines. He served in Vietnam in 1968 as a Marine Corps sergeant, leading a recon squad through the tangled nightmare of the Hanoi jungle. That year, his squad was ambushed. Of the 8 men he commanded, only he made it out alive. They had trusted him, followed his orders, bled beside him, and then they were gone, just like that. When he came home, there was no parade, no hero's welcome, just silence and the strange weight of survival. Calvin never sought the spotlight. He took a job as a janitor at Lincoln High School, sweeping floors and polishing lockers. He did it for over 40 years, long after others his age had retired. He liked the routine, the quiet, the sense of control. To the students, he was simply Mr. Mercer, a man of few words but kind eyes. He was the one who taped up the banners before homecoming, changed flickering light bulbs in the science lab, and always had a Band-Aid when a kid skinned their knee on the stairs. He never yelled, never rushed, and always nodded hello. Some of the older teachers remembered when he first started, back when he still walked with a Marine's posture and a jaw tight with unspoken things. He never married, never had children. When asked why, he would only shrug and say, "The boys took care of me once. I owe them more than I could ever give back." No one ever pressed him on what that meant. His squad, the 7 young men frozen forever in a black and white photo, had become his family. He kept the photo in a weathered wooden frame beside his bed. He would clean the glass once a week, talk to them on Christmas Eve, and whisper their names on the anniversary of the ambush. It was his ritual, his way of making sure they never faded. In recent years, Calvin's body had begun to betray him. The same legs that had carried wounded Marines through enemy fire now struggled with stairs. His hands, once steady enough to rebuild a carburetor, now trembled pouring coffee. Doctors said it was his heart, worn down from decades of pushing forward without pause. But Calvin knew the truth. It wasn't his body that ached. It was his promise. He had told the boys, in a moment soaked in blood and gunfire, that if he made it home, he'd make sure they were remembered. Not just on some wall, but as people, as brothers. And now, as the ticking in his chest grew louder with each passing week, he feared that time might rob him of that chance. That's what led him to Washington. That's what made him tuck the photo into his jacket and step onto a Greyhound bus alone. It wasn't glory he wanted. It was peace. And peace for Calvin Mercer meant keeping a vow that no one else even knew existed. The doctor said it softly, like he was offering an apology. "Congestive heart failure, Mr. Mercer. It's progressive. You'll need to slow down and maybe start thinking about the things that matter most." Calvin Mercer didn't say a word in response. He simply nodded, stood, and shook the man's hand with the same steady grip he'd used for 85 years. A grip that had once pulled brothers from burning wreckage and jungle mud. That evening, he didn't eat dinner. He sat in his kitchen chair for hours, the lights dim, the ticking of the clock the only company. The worn photograph sat on the table in front of him, its frame cracked along the edges, the glass slightly fogged after years of wiping it clean with the edge of a shirt. 7 men. They were boys, really. 20, maybe 21. Full of jokes and ambition. Some wrote letters to sweethearts back home. Some carried harmonicas in their packs. And all of them followed Calvin Mercer through the thick hell of Vietnam like he was invincible. He wasn't, but they believed he was. One humid morning outside Hanoi, everything fell apart. A flash ambush, expertly planned, fast, ruthless. There was no time to retreat, no time to think, only time to fight and die. Calvin dragged 3 men out of the jungle that day. 2 died in his arms. The third bled out in the evac chopper before they left the canopy. Calvin came home alone. They had trusted him to lead. He had. And still, only he survived. For decades, he carried that weight with quiet discipline. Never asked why me. Never gave in to the ache. Instead, he swept floors, patched walls, fixed lockers, lived small, spoke even less. But the diagnosis changed something. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the promise, the one he made silently, long ago, kneeling in the mud next to the shattered body of Private Lewis. "I'll live for all of us," he'd whispered. "I'll make sure you're remembered." And now, after all these years, Calvin Mercer was running out of time. He had fulfilled the living part, but the remembering, that remained undone. He looked again at the photo. Their faces smiled back, frozen in time, untouched by age, unbroken by regret. Each one a story, a soul, a promise. He knew what he had to do. The Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C. It was where their memory could live beyond him. A place not just of stone, but of stories, where civilians wandered through without knowing the cost of each name, but left just a little more humbled. He had always meant to go, always found excuses not to. The trip was too long, the money too tight, nothing proper to wear. But the real reason had always been fear, not of the place, but of the past. That fear was gone now. Early the next morning, Calvin laid out his best jacket, the one with the marine lapel pin still shining after all these years. He polished his shoes with a rag, slow and deliberate. The photo, now wrapped in a handkerchief, was tucked carefully into the inside pocket, close to his heart. He called the bus station, bought a one-way ticket to D.C., and packed a single bag. No one knew he was leaving. He preferred it that way. There would be no ceremony, no farewell, just one old Marine fulfilling a vow. His time was nearly up, but not their memory, not if he had anything to say about it. The Navy Memorial stood like a cathedral of silence in the heart of Washington, D.C. Its towering white stone pillars gleamed under the mid-morning sun, and American flags fluttered in a gentle rhythm above rows of polished steps. Families moved about quietly, cameras clicking, children in matching school shirts clustered around statues of sailors frozen in bronze salute. The air smelled faintly of rain on warm marble and respect. Calvin Mercer stood at the base of the stairs, staring up. He hadn't been here before, had seen it in books, documentaries, postcards, but never in person. For a long moment, he didn't move. The breeze tugged softly at the brim of his Marine's cap. Then with effort, he took the first step. One slow step at a time, as if each rise carved into the stone demanded permission from his knees. Inside, the light was softer. The echoes of footsteps bounced faintly across marble. Displays lined the walls, uniforms under glass, battle maps from the Pacific, medals, photographs, plaques etched with names too numerous to count. Calvin stood still. He hadn't come to look. He had come to leave something behind. He made his way to the reception counter near the central hall. Behind it sat a young woman with a straight posture and a tired expression. Rachel, the name tag said. She was typing something quickly, barely glancing up as he approached. "Good morning," Calvin said, removing his cap. She looked up briefly. "Hi there. Welcome to the memorial. Can I help you?" "I hope so," he replied, voice steady but quiet. "I'd like to make a donation." Rachel blinked. "What kind of donation?" Calvin reached into his jacket slowly and pulled out the handkerchief-wrapped photo. With great care, he unwrapped it and laid it gently on the counter, like a relic. "It's a photograph of my squad," he said. "Vietnam, 1968. All of them are gone now. I was hoping it could stay here with them. Rachel gave the photo a passing glance. 7 young men, all grinning in their Navy gear, one with his arm around another's shoulder. The jungle behind them was blurred, but their faces were clear, alive, eager, so very young. She offered a polite but neutral smile. That's a powerful image, sir. But unfortunately, we have procedures for historic donations. You'd need to schedule an appointment with our acquisitions department. They're open Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5. Calvin hesitated. I came a long way. I don't have anything else. No documents. Just this. Just the memory. Rachel softened for a second, but years of repetition had trained her. I understand, truly, but we can't just accept items without verification. It's policy. As Calvin opened his mouth to speak again, 2 men approached from a side hallway, security and Officer Grant and Officer Miller, as their badges read. Both looked to be in their 40s, with standard-issue body language, straight-backed, assessing, ready to de-escalate. Everything all right here? Grant asked Rachel. This gentleman would like to leave a photograph, but we've explained the procedures. Grant stepped forward, eyeing Calvin first, then the photo. Sir, I understand this might be personal, but we can't accept items outside protocol. We get dozens of people a week with old photos. Without paperwork or military ID tied to an archive, there's no way for us to— It's real, Calvin said. It's all I have left of them. We're not questioning your sincerity, Officer Miller added, folding his arms. But rules are rules. Otherwise, we'd have piles of war relics and no way to verify them. Calvin looked down at the photograph. His fingers hovered above it, unsure whether to grab it or let it go. When he reached out to move it toward the memorial hall, Grant gently stepped in front of him. Sir, he said firmly, you'll need to take that with you. We can't accept it today. Rachel avoided eye contact. The officer stood tall and steady. Other visitors had begun to notice. A family paused. A group of college students slowed their steps, one discreetly pulling out a phone. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was clear. The old man was being told to leave, and so he did. He wrapped the photo again, tucking it back into his coat over his heart. He nodded. No words of protest, no raised voice, just dignity and silence. Grant escorted him gently toward the front doors. I'm sure they were good men, he said, trying to soften the moment. They were the best, Calvin replied. And then he stepped out into the daylight, a man dismissed not by cruelty, but by cold, indifferent process. They didn't know who he was. Not yet. Colonel Evelyn Sharp wasn't a woman easily shaken. As chief curator of the Navy Memorial, she carried the solemn duty of preserving the stories of those who had served, and of making sure none were lost to time. She'd reviewed thousands of service records, artifacts, and visitor logs during her 15-year tenure. But that Friday morning, something unusual happened. It started with a name. As part of her weekly routine, Evelyn flipped through the visitor sign-in book in her office, a habit she believed revealed more than any surveillance footage. She liked to see who came and why. She looked for patterns, for names she recognized, and for the rare visitor who didn't just pass through but came with purpose. That's when she saw it. Calvin Mercer, written in tight, careful cursive near the bottom of the page. Her breath caught. That name wasn't just familiar, it was haunting. She hadn't seen it in decades, not since her older brother, Captain Benjamin Sharp, had spoken it late one night after too many bourbons and not enough sleep. Evelyn remembered it clearly. Benjamin, home from Vietnam, still haunted by the war, had told her the story of a Marine sergeant named Mercer, a man who appeared in the chaos like a ghost, dragged him out of a hot zone under enemy fire, and disappeared before the medics even landed. He saved my life, Benjamin had whispered. That man carried me half a mile with a bullet in his leg. Never even asked for thanks. I owe him everything. Benjamin never found Mercer again. And 3 years ago, Benjamin passed away. A father, grandfather, and decorated officer whose life had been built on a second chance he never expected to have. Now Evelyn stared at the name in the visitor log. It had to be him. With a trembling hand, she turned to her computer and began typing. She accessed the Navy's internal archive, a database only senior curators could use, and entered Calvin Mercer. United States Marine Corps, Vietnam, 1968. The screen populated slowly. Then it appeared. Sergeant Calvin Mercer, Reconnaissance Unit, Hanoi Operations Sector, Silver Star recipient for extraordinary heroism under fire. Bronze Star with V device for Valor, survived a high-casualty ambush and extracted wounded under active fire. Carried Captain Benjamin Sharp to safety during Operation Iron Ridge, May 1968. Her hand flew to her mouth. It was real, all of it. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen as emotions surged to the surface. The man her brother had described, the ghost in the jungle, had been standing in her building just days ago, and no one had known. She picked up the phone and dialed the security desk. "Security, this is Officer Miller." "Officer Miller, this is Colonel Sharp. I need a full incident report from last Friday involving a guest named Calvin Mercer." There was a pause. "You mean the older gentleman with the photo?" "Yes. What happened?" "He tried to donate a photo of his Vietnam squad. Said they all died but him. He didn't have paperwork, so we told him about the process. He didn't argue, just left." Evelyn closed her eyes, her voice lowered. "You sent him away?" "Well, technically." She hung up. Without wasting a moment, Evelyn pulled out the local directory. There were several listings under the name Calvin Mercer in Ohio. She started dialing, one after the next. Wrong numbers, disconnected lines, voicemail. Finally, after 10 tries, "Hello?" A quiet voice answered. She froze. "Mr. Mercer?" "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Colonel Evelyn Sharp. I'm the curator at the Navy Memorial. You were here last Friday, weren't you?" A long pause. "Yes, ma'am, I was. I'm sorry if I caused any issue." "You didn't," she said, her voice cracking. "Mr. Mercer, did you serve with a man named Benjamin Sharp?" There was silence on the other end. Deep, heavy silence. "Benjamin," Calvin whispered. "Tall kid from Pennsylvania? Got hit near Iron Ridge?" "Yes," Evelyn said, tears beginning to fill her eyes. "He was my brother." Calvin didn't answer right away. She heard his breath shake. "Your brother," he murmured. "He lived?" "He lived a full life," she said, her voice barely holding steady. "Thanks to you." A rustling sound, then quiet sobs. Calvin Mercer, who hadn't cried in 50 years, was crying now. Evelyn let him. Then she said gently, "Mr. Mercer, I need you to come back to the memorial, not to donate, but to be honored. Please, let me do this right." And so, with shaking hands and a heavy heart, Calvin agreed. This time, it wouldn't be a dismissal, it would be a homecoming. The phone on the kitchen wall hadn't rung in 2 days. Calvin Mercer wasn't expecting anyone to call. Most people who knew him were long gone, and the rest had stopped checking in when they realized he never needed anything. So when it did ring, sharp, sudden, slicing through the quiet, he stared at it for a moment before picking it up. "Hello?" His voice was calm, cautious. He didn't recognize the number. "Mr. Mercer?" The woman on the other end asked, her voice formal but shaking slightly. "Yes, speaking." "This is Colonel Evelyn Sharp. I'm the chief curator at the United States Navy Memorial. Were you here last Friday morning?" Calvin paused. His grip tightened slightly on the receiver. "Yes, ma'am, I was." "I hope I'm not intruding. I just—" She took a breath. "I saw your name in the guest log." Calvin's eyes narrowed. He instinctively braced for the worst. Maybe a complaint. Maybe one of the guards had filed a report. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble," he offered. "I didn't mean to break any rules. I wanted to leave something behind. For my brothers." Evelyn's silence lasted just long enough for Calvin to feel it. But then she said softly, "Mr. Mercer, did you serve with a young officer named Benjamin Sharp?" "In Vietnam. Hanoi Sector, 1968. Calvin nearly dropped the phone. "Sharp," he whispered, the name blooming from somewhere buried deep. "Ben, Captain Ben Sharp, got hit during that ambush. Left lung, right above the ribs." Now it was Evelyn who fell silent. "Yes," she finally managed. "He was my brother." Calvin sat down heavily in his kitchen chair. His heart, already fragile, Felt like it had stopped for a second. He reached instinctively for his chest, fingers brushing the outline of the photo through his coat pocket. "Ben lived?" he asked, voice unsteady. "He did," she said, "because of you." There was a sound over the line. Not words, just a soft, broken exhale. The kind a man makes when 50 years of silence finally split open. "I carried him," Calvin said. "He was fading fast. I didn't think he'd make it, but he looked at me like he was ready to fight if I kept going, so I didn't stop." "Emma, he never forgot you," Evelyn said. "He talked about you often. Said a ghost dragged him out of hell. He tried to find you. He died 3 years ago, still hoping he would." Calvin closed his eyes. The kitchen disappeared. The years disappeared. All that was left was that jungle, that gunfire, that weight on his back, and the promise he made in the dust of war. "I thought they all forgot," he said. "I thought I failed them." "You didn't," Evelyn replied gently. "You saved one. And through him, his children, his grandchildren, you saved generations." For the first time in decades, Calvin Mercer wept, not the hard tears of grief, but the quiet ones of release, of being seen, of being remembered. "Mr. Mercer," Evelyn continued, voice growing steadier, "I want you to come back to the memorial, not as a guest, as an honored man. We're preparing something for you, something long overdue." "I don't need any ceremony," Calvin said after a pause. "I just wanted the photo to stay." "And it will," she said firmly. "But this time, you won't have to leave it at the front desk. You'll place it yourself, where it belongs." Calvin nodded slowly, though she couldn't see him. "All right," he whispered. "I'll come." Calvin Mercer arrived at the Navy Memorial that Wednesday morning, an hour before opening. He wasn't early by accident. Old habits don't die easy, and for a Marine sergeant, showing up early was second nature. His shoes were polished. His jacket was the same Navy coat he wore last week, except now it had been brushed and pressed. The photograph was once again tucked into the inside pocket, over his heart. Only this time, it wasn't wrapped in shame or silence. It was going home. When the glass doors opened, he didn't walk in alone. Colonel Evelyn Sharp met him on the steps. She wore her full Navy dress uniform, medals gleaming under the morning sun, posture straight as ceremony demanded. But when she looked at Calvin, her expression softened. "Sergeant Mercer," she said, offering her hand. Calvin took it, a little slower now, but firm. "Colonel," he replied, tipping his cap. Inside, everything had changed. The lobby was no longer just a hallway of reverent marble. Now it was adorned with fresh flowers. A velvet rope guided visitors toward the main gallery. Staff stood silently along the corridor, each wearing a Navy memorial pin and solemn expressions of respect. A few were clearly holding back tears. Rachel, the receptionist who had first greeted Calvin, stood behind her desk. When he walked past, she lowered her head and said softly, "I'm sorry, sir." Calvin stopped, looked at her, then gave a slight nod. "No hard feeling," he said. "You were doing your job." But the way he said it, calm, generous, quietly dignified, made her eyes glass over. Colonel Sharp guided him into the gallery, where a reserved space had been cleared at the center wall. A glass display case waited, flanked by 2 flags. Inside was a simple bronze plaque, already engraved, "In honor of Sergeant Calvin Mercer and the 7 men who never came home. Vietnam, 1968. Beneath it was a blank spot, just large enough for the photo. "You ready?" Evelyn asked. Calvin's fingers reached into his jacket. He pulled out the photo slowly, gently, as if handling something still alive. He stepped forward, placed it inside the case, and stood there for a moment longer than anyone expected. No words, just breath, in silence. Then he turned to the small crowd that had gathered behind him. Reporters stood at a respectful distance. Several visitors had stopped mid-tour and watched from afar. Even the guards, Officer Grant and Officer Miller, stood near the doorway, hats in hand. Colonel Sharp spoke first. "This photo is more than paper," she said. "It's proof of lives lived, service given, and a promise kept. One man's commitment to remember when the world forgot." The room stayed quiet, reverent. Then Calvin finally spoke. "I never told anyone about them," he said, voice quiet but unwavering. Not because I was ashamed, because I didn't think anyone would care. But I was wrong. He looked around the room, not for applause, but for acknowledgement. These boys, they weren't just names in a report. They were sons, brothers, pranksters, dreamers. They carried each other through hell and didn't come back. I carried their memory. He paused. And now, I can finally set it down. Evelyn nodded. And we'll carry it from here. As Calvin stepped back, a young Navy officer in full dress stepped forward and saluted him. Others followed. One by one, active service members and veterans in the crowd stood at attention, not out of duty, out of gratitude. The ceremony had ended. The cameras had been turned off. Visitors drifted toward other exhibits, and the whispers faded into respectful quiet. But Calvin Mercer remained. He sat on the steps just outside the grand entrance of the Navy Memorial, cap in his lap, back slightly hunched, hands resting on his knees. For the first time in a long time, his shoulders didn't feel so heavy. He looked up toward the sky. It was clear now, a soft blue canvas stretching over Washington, the flags above the memorial stirring gently in the breeze. Somewhere far off, the muffled sound of traffic moved like a distant memory. The weight in his chest wasn't just grief anymore. It was something else. Release. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded handkerchief, now empty. The photograph wasn't with him anymore. It was inside, safe, framed behind glass, witnessed, finally seen. He thought of their names: Carter, Lewis, Herrera, Boone, Red Thompson, Daniels, and Young. He whispered each one slowly, as if they could still hear him. "You're home now, boys," he murmured. "You're not just a memory in my head. You're real to them now, too." A little girl walked by with her father, holding a small American flag. She looked at Calvin and paused. "Are you a soldier?" she asked. Her father looked startled, apologetic, but Calvin just smiled softly. "Was," he said. "A long time ago." The little girl nodded like she understood more than she should, then walked on, her flag fluttering as she went. Calvin closed his eyes. Let the breeze move through his thinning hair. He hadn't wanted glory. He hadn't even wanted thanks. He only wanted what every soldier who made it home truly wants, for the ones who didn't to never be forgotten. Inside that memorial, surrounded by marble and memory, 7 young men now had a place in history. And he had finally laid his burden down. He exhaled slowly. A life of silence had led to this moment. Not a parade, not a headline, just a quiet seat on a sunlit step. And peace. With one final breath, he whispered to the wind, "We made it, boys. You're home now. And so am I." Oh. Calvin Mercer didn't ask for recognition. He never posted his story online, never gave a speech. He simply showed up, quietly with purpose, to fulfill a promise he made over 50 years ago. And in doing so, he reminded us of something many have forgotten, that honor doesn't need a microphone, that sacrifice doesn't always come with headlines, and that even the quietest life can echo for generations if someone chooses to listen. In today's fast-paced world where moments are measured in likes and memories often fade with a scroll, Calvin's story stands still. It asks us, who are we forgetting? The veterans in our neighborhoods, the elders in our families, the people whose stories live in faded photographs and worn letters. Have we stopped listening? This wasn't just a story about war. It was about dignity, memory, and the quiet power of keeping a promise. So we want to ask you, our viewers, what promises have you kept for someone who's no longer here? Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone deserved to be remembered and wasn't? We invite you to share those memories in the comments below. Whether it's about a loved one, a veteran, a mentor, your voice matters. Your story may be the one someone else needs to hear today. And if Calvin Mercer's journey moved you even just a little, we hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel. Every story we tell is a tribute, not to fame, but to the forgotten. Hit that like button, share it with someone who values these kinds of stories, and let's make sure these lives and lessons don't fade away. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And as Calvin whispered on the steps of the memorial, you're home now, and so am I. We'll see you in the next story.